Good evening and welcome to Fishhawk Live in the Great Lakes Fishing Podcast. Tonight we're joined by Trevor Sumption from Fishhawk Electronics, my boss. Trevor, thanks for coming on the show tonight.
You must be getting really desperate for guests.
It's getting that way. I think we've pretty much scraped the barrel, and now we're at the bottom, and we found you.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think when we got an email about a week ago or 2 weeks ago from, I actually wrote the gentleman's name down, is Steve Hanley from somewhere north of the border, and he asked if we had a podcast that dealt specifically with Fishhawk, and I was kind of like, Chris, do we have a podcast? We were both kind of like, no, we've actually never done one.
So. Right, and that was something we talked about when we decided to do this, is that we didn't want to make this podcast a 45-minute commercial for Fishhawk. We wanted to make it something to promote fishing. We wanted to get people excited about getting on the water and doing that type of thing. So we've really kind of avoided doing that purposely. But we do have some people out there that want to know more about the product, want to know more about the company. So that's why we're doing this tonight, is kind of be able to get some of that information out there. And actually, I think I'm going to learn something tonight. So I'm pretty excited about that as well.
I think like when we met, so we've been doing this 2 years, right?
2 years, yeah.
The podcast. I think in like our initial meeting, I don't think you believed me when I said we want to do a Fishhawk podcast, but we don't want it to be about Fishhawk. So I don't know. So maybe I've held true to my word. So
yeah, in my mind, when you said that, I went, that's exactly what I want to hear, because what you don't want is somebody says, let's do a show that's a commercial for Fishhawk or whatever product you're working with. So I was actually really happy to hear that and excited to hear that. So it's led us, and I think it's put us in a good position, and I think a lot of people are enjoying. I'm seeing the numbers on the podcast right now. People are enjoying listening to it and hearing about all the different destinations and different techniques that captains are using. So I think it's gone really well. But tonight we're going to do something different. We are going to talk about Fishhawk. Right. And before we get started, I just want you to kind of take us back to when the earth cooled and give us an idea of the history of the company.
Yeah, so it actually originated in the late '60s. It came from an aerospace background. A gentleman that was working for Raytheon at the time as a defense contractor, and so that's where he got his sonar experience. And so Fishhawk actually, as a company, was one of the first companies to produce a flasher type unit, like the original Lowrance Green Box. And I remember as a kid, watching the Virgil Ward Facts of Fishing, or Fishing with Virgil Ward, Championship Fishing with Virgil Ward it was. But I remember, even at that time, Fishhawk was, that was one of his sponsors, and that was the flasher unit, the sonar unit that he used back in the day. And like I say, that goes back to the kind of late '60s through the '70s, and then about that same time, they were, the big experiment where they started planting, salmon into Lake Michigan. And so that fishery was kind of starting to take hold and took off really fast. And those fish, it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that those fish were super sensitive to temperature. So just kind of the stars aligning, and I actually wasn't alive in that era. So I can't say firsthand, but basically my understanding is that they kind of took some of the things they learned in their previous work experience in doing the defense contracting, and then of course with the fishing sonar, and then they figured out how to send temperature wirelessly through the water on a sonar signal, which is the same thing that we do today. So like I say, the technology itself, how we communicate information from down below to back to the boat, that theory of operation or that technology, it honestly hasn't really changed since the 1970s. And now, everything that's kind of happened after that point has been a continuation, of those original products. So a unit that a lot of people would be familiar with, some of our more mature customers would be familiar with, would be like the Fishhawk 840. That unit came out right around 1980, 81, I think, and actually was in continuous production all the way through 2002. So there's not too many marine electronics products that can claim that that long of a lifespan. And then the company, when I acquired the company in 2009, and this was actually from the son of the founder who ran the company successfully for a long time. His name was Bill Sherwood, a super nice guy. He passed away a couple of years ago, but super great guy. And Bill had maintained the company for a long time, and had a very loyal customer base. And we were able to kind of pick that up where Bill left off and develop some new product. And it's almost 2022 now. So that's the short version of the long story. Does that cover it for you?
Yeah, I think so. That's something that you touched on there that I've found in the 2 years that I've been with you is that you do have a loyal following. You have people who go to bat for you all the time, and there's very few times that I've worked for a lot of different companies in the social media space, and a lot of times you post things and you get a lot of negative comments under it, and we just really rarely see that. And oftentimes, usually it's people saying how great things are and how great the company of Fishhawk, how it's run. So I think that's something that since you've been with the company now since 2009, I think it's something that you can really hang your hat on.
Yeah, no, it's kind of my experience in the industry. Started out in retail. Worked for a really good independent retailer. Got a lot of experience there. Even more so than my college experience and whatever. I learned a lot more at retail than I did in college, honestly. Then went to work as a manufacturer's rep and things worked for some really good lines there. Shimano, Pradco, some big companies, and that was the one thing you kind of saw is the customer service side of it was always just a really key component of it. And I actually I kind of have a retail mentality on that, where the good independent retailers out there, those guys are successful because they take care of the people that come through their door. And I think that was probably the most valuable lesson that I learned at retail, and have tried to bring that through, certainly into this company. And I kind of jokingly say that, everything I've needed to know for, to run this company, I learned in kindergarten and maybe a little bit in the movie Tommy Boy, but mostly in kindergarten, where it's the old golden rule thing, and it's kind of business 101 stuff. And we've stuck to that, and it's worked out really well for us. So
what are you taking from Tommy Boy? Are we just talking about sticking our head in wrong places, or what's the big tip from?
There's so many, life, business, and sales lessons in that movie. I couldn't even start. I can quote most of it, but from memory. But yeah. So that's probably not what my college professors would like to hear. But there's an element of truth in it. So.
Well, like you said, you've been developing some products. Let's go through the product line real quick. Tell us a little bit about the 4 current models of Fishhawk systems.
Well, let's start with the X4. The X4 was the first product that we came out with, and the X4 is based very heavily on the old 840, doing the same thing just with modern components. Being developed essentially in the early 80s, a lot had changed in that period of time. So we really took exactly most of the things that we did on the 840. And then develop that just using modern components, modern layouts, things like that. And that was the first unit that we introduced in 2009. The second product that we introduced on our own was the Fishhawk Td. And that was a direct replacement for the old Fishhawk 520. And I should have brought some of these things with me to actually show. I opted not to go back to the office tonight, so I'm in my basement. But the old Fishhawk 520, that was the reel version. So it was basically a handheld reel that you would strip the line out, and there was a temperature probe that there was 2 models, came with 100 feet of cable or 200 feet of cable, and all that did was just show you that was just temperature as an analog temperature gauge. But the Fishhawk Td, we designed to replace that product, where then it was something that you could drop down through the water column, and it gives you that snapshot of what the temperature profile is. So you get the temperature every 5 feet. So that was the second product we came out with. That was about 2010, maybe 11. And then the next product was the first. Yeah, there you go. There's the TD. Next product was the first version of the X4D, which was it was originally the X4 Plus depth. It didn't look quite like that. It didn't have the Bluetooth compatibility, but that was the first one that introduced probe depth. That was a feature that that we got asked for consistently. Was the depth based on water pressure. Canon actually had a product out that did that same thing, and when that kind of went away on the market, there was definitely people looking for that. So that's when we did that original plus depth version, which became the X4D with the Bluetooth, which is still the current product. So yeah, the kind of the three primary products that we've had for a while. They've actually been in the market now since about, starting in 2009, about 2012. So that stuff's been around a while. We're going on a decade on that stuff. And then about 3 years ago, 3 years ago, we introduced the X2, and that's a portable version. We're still using the same probe, different transducer setup. It allows you to move that from boat to boat. Also gives you the option of using it with or without a downrigger, and that was in direct response to feedback we were getting from the walleye market on Lake Erie, where lots of anglers who fish on Lake Erie also fish Lake Ontario or Lake Michigan for salmon, and they were really the techniques and everything were really pretty similar. So they already had kind of they understood the importance of speed specifically, but also some temperature too. But they were really dialed in on the speed part of it already, and applied that to their walleye fishing, whether it was with weighted lines like leg core, some of their flat line crankbait fishing, some of those kind of things. So that's the X2. That's the most recent addition to the line, and that kind of brings us to where we are today, where we've got the three units: the X4, the X4D with the Bluetooth, the X2. Those are kind of the three systems, and then we still have the TD in the line, which is the handheld device. So.
Well, Eric Modney, one of our friends from Toronto, has joined the show via YouTube. We also got Mike from YouTube saying the X4D is awesome. He loves his. If anyone has any questions for Trevor on Fishhawk, feel free to drop a line, and we will try our best as we can to get those answered. Trevor, can we walk through? I'm going to pull up the feature chart real quick, and if you can kind of go through and just kind of tell us, why would somebody choose an X4 over an X4D or an X4D over an X4? Let's kind of take a look at those two models and kind of the differences there first.
Yeah. All right, so there we go. I can see it pretty good now. So I guess we'll start. Not sure how I arranged this, if I actually had a plan in mind when I did this or not, but looks like I kind of did. So let's start with maybe the most critical piece of information, or the most critical information is obviously the information down below, your probe information, the information at depth. So that's going to be, all the models are going to give you the systems now. So the X2, the X4, the X4D, all the models are going to give you your speed down with the probe, and that's mechanical speed. So we're just simply counting the revolutions of that little paddle wheel down there. So you get mechanical speed at the probe, and then you're also getting temperature at the probe. Those are the two critical pieces of information. And between the two, we usually get this question, what's more important, speed or temperature? I think the answer to that is it depends. But if it were me personally, I would pick speed. Speed to me is the most critical piece of information that we provide. What I tell people a lot is that temperature will tell me where I don't want to fish. It'll help me eliminate water where there probably aren't going to be fish. But speed is what lets me repeat what's working and kind of develop a pattern. So that's how I view it. There's different opinions on it. I think it's going to change. That'll differ by probably times of the year and things like that. So, but that's your kind of we'll call that the bottom line, with the probe being the bottom line. So they're all going to give you that speed and temperature. So that throws in the optional piece of information, which is the probe depth. And that's what the X4D gives you that the others don't. And that probe depth is based on water pressure. So there's a pressure sensor built into the probe. So the depth that displays on screen is the true depth that the probe is underwater. So it's not, it's not a sonar depth or something like that. It's actually how far the probe really is. And again, that's based on water pressure. That's information that, I think it's nice to have information. I'm real open about telling people I don't think it's critical information. I don't, we fished for a long time without it. And there's a lot of really good fishermen that don't care about it because all they do is they repeat what they did the prior day, or they repeat what's working. So I don't think it's the most critical piece of information by any means, but it is a nice to have type thing. And actually, from a sales perspective, we actually sell more of the X4Ds now than we do of the X4s, and that's been the case for about probably the last 3 seasons or so. So again, it's a nice to have. I don't consider it a critical one. The X4 and the X4D will also give you your surface information based on the transducer. So you're going to get your surface temperature and surface speed, and the surface speed, I'll kind of point out, that's a mechanical speed. That can be a fickle one because mechanical speed, it has a lot to do with transducer placement and how the water runs underneath your boat. So that number can actually vary quite a bit by setup. So I would say that of all the pieces of information on that we're giving you, that surface speed number that we provide you is probably the least important, because you've got speed over ground probably, or almost everybody has GPS, and so you've got your speed over ground there. That's a really good measure for your surface speed. So that we provide that, but it's probably the least important thing we provide. The X2 unit, that one doesn't give you any of the surface information. It only gives you the down information. So it gives you your probe temp and your probe speed. So that's kind of the breakdown at the high level, where as far as the data that it's actually providing. So that's what we kind of walk people through, ask them what they're looking for, and try and get a feel for just how much information that they really want to see, and that's how we kind of used what we use to break that out. The other thing that kind of comes into play sometimes is depending on what your setups are. The X4D unit, that's the one that has the Bluetooth radio on board. So that's the one that will communicate, either to your mobile device. It interacts, or that's the one that hooks up with the Canon Optimum downriggers, gives you that Bluetooth networking capability. So that may be, one of the reasons why we sell more of the X4Ds than we do of the X4s, is just for people that want that, that want that Bluetooth optionality. So.
Yeah, let's get into the X2 a little bit here before we're starting to get some good questions coming up. We'll get to those in a second. But the other thing that I think that the X2 brings that, and we're seeing more and more people go to that, is, it's more for the guy who's going to use his Fishhawk this weekend, and then next weekend he's going to do the inland lake, or maybe he wants to be able to take it on a buddy's boat. So there's no permanently mounted transducer there. You kind of talk about how that system works on the X2.
Yeah, so that was so if we would say a typical Fishhawk customer, that's really changed a lot. Even in the last 10 years, that's changed a lot. Where most of the product we sell now ends up on multi-species boats. Most of them are aluminum. Most of them are 20 feet or less, so they're smaller trailer boats. That's where most of our product is going now. Where historically, it's always been to a big traditional Great Lakes boat that goes in the water in the spring and comes out the weekend after Labor Day type thing. So historically, that was our business, and now really, within the last 10 years, that's shifted really rapidly to the trailer boat market, and that's what the X2 lets you do. So you might be on Lake Michigan one weekend, and then you're on an inland lake tubing with the kids the next weekend, things like that. So that's really one of the reasons, that was one of the big pushes in developing that unit, along with what we were seeing, hearing from the guys on Lake Erie that don't use downriggers. So they wanted a way to get the speed and temp without having to use a downrigger, because they don't really need it. So those were really the two things that pushed the development of the X2, and it's a great unit. I mean, it's actually, personally, it's kind of the unit that I actually use a lot. There's a few, there's trade-offs with everything. And that's one thing about our product line. You don't really see a lot of difference in price. I mean, the units are all relatively, they're priced relatively close. So we're not designing products to fit a specific price point. We're designing them to fit a need. So, an X2 really isn't very much cheaper than X4. In fact, it'll be the same price as an X4 going forward here into 22, but it's just designed for a different application where it has that slip deucer setup, which rides either on the downrigger cable or on a rod setup if you're not using a downrigger, but it has the slip deucer, versus our traditional transom-mounted transducer, which does require some care and feeding. There's no question about that. There's an extra step there, so there's I would say that's not as convenient as a transom-mounted transducer, but for somebody in the use situation like we talked about, where they're on a multi-species boat, or maybe they're fishing, inland, or whatever, they're pulling all that trolling stuff off the boat. It's still a really good solution for that person.
Starting to get some questions pouring in. Let's go to some guest questions here before I go on with some more of my questions that I wrote. But let's go with this one's Ken Rodenhouse from YouTube. He has an 840 unit that he took off the boat, put away in a box. Is there any way that he can test it on dry land?
Yeah, so there's actually a video, Ken, on the site that if you look at if you go to the Fishhawk website and you go to videos, and then there's the troubleshooting videos. There's a troubleshooting video that you can watch. It'll actually show you exactly how to do that. But basically, you can activate that probe. You can plug in the transducer. I think it might be, that one right there. Troubleshooting no probe readings. So that same process you could use to see if that unit is sending still in the box. So watch that video, and that'll detail that. But yes, to answer the question, yes, you can do it. It's a lot more fickle. I mean, remember, all this stuff is designed. Sound travels a lot better in water than it does in air. So all these tests that we do on dry land through air, they don't. They have to be done right. Otherwise, you may not get the proper result out of it. So the probe has to be held really, it's got to be still, and it's got to be really close to the transducer for that to transmit through air, especially even more so in 840, because it doesn't have the transmit power that the X4 or X2 series of products do. So
Jamie Shane on Facebook, we're going to save your question for the end of the show.
That must be a showstopper. did you already pick your swag winner? Is it predetermined at this point, or what?
No, it's a common question, and we're going to save that one for the end. Rod T from YouTube, he wants to know if the X2 will ever have a hookup to the boat battery.
At this point, we have no plans on making a hookup for the battery. No.
All right. Tiffany Ward just wants to send you kudos, basically just saying greatest customer support, saved her fiance a weekend of fishing. So attaboy to the crew, attaboy and girls to the crew over at Fishhawk. We got Curtis Douglas. Here's another question that we get quite a few times. Anything in the works being able to potentially run multiple probes, get the data at different depths at the same time?
There really isn't. We've got a lot of things in the works, but no, we don't have anything in development for for a multiple probe setup. We actually had one. Fishhawk had one in the late 80s, early 90s. It was met with kind of measured success at that point. But really kind of the two things that push that further down our development list typically are the compromises that we have to make in order to do it. There's just a few compromises that we would rather do one really well than do half, or than do two kind of halfway. There's that part of it, and then the other part of it is just simply a numbers thing, where there's certainly like the asker. I mean, there certainly are avid users that would look for that two probe system, but there's still a lot of users that are so concerned about losing one probe that's actually kind of a barrier to entry for those people. So that's kind of a two-part. We've definitely explored it. Like I said, Fishhawk had it once upon a time, but that's the reason that it's not in active development at this point.
All right, here's a new customer, Alexander, over on YouTube. Says he fishes Lake Michigan. He's got an X4D arriving this week. Any important information you would provide a new user regarding installation or using the X4D?
I think the biggest thing, Alexander, is take a look at the actually, I give people a hard time sometimes. I'm guilty of it myself, so I'm not really throwing stones, but actually read the instructions that come in there, and especially look at, there's an illustration that shows your recommended transducer locations. And I laugh because I talked to 3 different guys today, that were having issues when they were fishing in deeper water or fishing faster, and all 3 of them had the same problem where they had buried the transducer behind a kicker motor, and so that's why I kind of chuckle at that one. But I would say the biggest thing would be to take a look at that diagram, get a plan for where you want to put the transducer, and if you've got any questions, by all means ask us. And we added live chat to our site. I don't know, was it this year or maybe last year? Can't remember. But anyways, we added live chat to the website here, within the last season, and that's been an awesome tool because it comes to Steve or myself, and we can answer those questions for you real quick. And a really good thing to do actually with when it comes to mounting like that, if you have any question at all, and most of the time it is fairly straightforward. I mean, you'll be able to figure it out from that diagram 90% of the time. But in that 10% case where you're just not quite sure, and maybe you got a lot going on back there, maybe you got a bunch of transducers or some trim tabs, things like that, snap a wide angle picture of the transom and send it to us, and we'll X marks the spot on your photo and tell you exactly where we think that transducer should go, where it's gonna work best for you. But other than that, it's a super simple install. It's easier than installing a fish finder from that perspective. So it's a pretty easy process. So.
All right, here's a question. I actually had this one written down for later in the show, but we'll break it out right now. From Tiffany over on Facebook. Is it important to calibrate your surface speed so that your GPS is the same?
If there was one thing I would change in the design of our units, I would take the calibration feature out. And I say that's not a right or wrong answer, but in our opinion, strongly, we would say no, it's not important to calibrate to your speed over ground. And the reason we say that is because all we do is we just count how many times around the little paddle wheel spins. Okay, so all we're doing is just counting that mechanically every time that goes around. So my canned line that I always repeat over and over again is that I don't care if that number is 2 or 200. All I care about is where I caught fish, because that's what I want to get back to. So if the number is 200, all I know I need to do at that point is get back to 200. So it doesn't really matter what the number is, because again, what we're providing that mechanical representation of speed. Without getting too far in the weeds in it, we even briefly considered, having A, B, C, D, E. I mean, actually doing it through with letters, because it's just something easier to look at. Now that would be kind of a pretty wild departure, I think, but that's kind of how that's how we look at it. And most of the time when we talk to folks on the phone, through support or whatever, if they're a lot of times if they're having troubles calibrating things, whatever, what we do is we do a hard reset. We set it right back to factory settings, tell them to fish it that way, and everybody's happy at that point. So.
All right, a couple of different comments coming in on that. One is Nick, and I know Nick's a guy that we've been talking to over the last couple of days. Basically just saying kind of the same thing that Tiffany was asking, saying that the speed over ground kind of goes all over the place. What do you got for Nick?
From the transducer, so that one goes back to that kind of what we talked about in the feature part of it, where that transducer, the placement on the transom and how water moves under the boat, that's what's impacting that transducer speed. In most cases, your mechanical transducer, the Fishhawk transducer, in most cases that will be significantly faster. It'll show as significantly faster than what you see on your speed over ground. So what I always do from a practical standpoint is I won't reference that number. What I'll do is I'll actually, on a column day, I'll make sure everything's at default, number one. So I'll have everything zeroed back out. I'll lower that probe down about 10 feet on a column day. I'll compare that to my speed over ground on my GPS, and it's typically going to be within a couple tenths of a mile an hour, if not right on. And that just verifies that everything's kind of where I want it. And at that point, I just fish that, fish it right at the factory zero.
All right, here's one from Ken once again. He's got an X4D. He says sometimes it varies. He wonders if his pancake weights are swimming around. What do you guys recommend as far as weights on the Downrigger with the probe?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what the different weights do is they change the, I would call it the the attack angle or the approach angle of the probe in the water. So that's what we've seen with different style weights is they all fish differently, and it's not that one fish is right or wrong by any means. It's just they fish differently. So that's why that's why you hear a lot of times fish your own numbers or fish your own program, because no two boats are the same. And that's the other kind of main calibration question or challenge that we run into is when people try to calibrate across boat. They try to calibrate to their buddy's boat, and they think they're trolling the same and everything looks the same. Well, it never works that way. It's never exactly the same. That approach angle isn't the same, and that affects how that paddle wheel behaves in the water. So yeah, that's the weights themselves. I don't know that we have a preferred one. I've always personally just used kind of the cheapest round balls that I could find. They seem to track fine. However, now with with a lot of people fishing heavier weights, then it's probably more important to to get some more streamlined weights or things like that. But that's just a personal thing on my part, and I do not claim to be the we work with a lot of great fishermen. I don't claim to be one of them. So.
All right. Haven't got this question yet, but I'm sure it's come. We see it all the time. The X4 and the X4D, they're both permanently mounted products. Are the transducers and probes interchangeable? Can you use one with the other? How does that work? Because we hear that question all the time.
Yeah, so everything's the same. The probe isn't the same. So the probe is actually different only because the X4D probe has the pressure sensor on board. But it can still talk to an X4. It's just not going to. There's just nowhere for that. The firmware isn't the same, and there's nowhere for the depth to display. So, but as far as the units themselves go, they all operate at 70 kilohertz, whether it's an X4, X2, or X4D. So they're all and actually even back to the 840s and 800s. The 800 was the predecessor of the 840. So everything still runs at 70 kilohertz. And the reason we use 70 kilohertz is it's a pretty unique frequency. Nobody else really uses it. It's very wide, so you've got think of your probe down in the water. Think of it like an upside down ice cream cone. So it's the exact opposite of your sonar unit, where it's narrow at the probe, and then the deeper it goes, the wider the signal goes. And that's what that 70 kilohertz frequency does. It provides you a wide angle there, which means your probe blowback and things like that. That's what kind of compensates for that is that wide angle. But to answer the question, they're all interchangeable, even back to the stuff that's older than me. So,
and that 70 kilohertz isn't something that other electronics are using on your boat, so you're not going to have any interference that way.
Yeah, there's some stock Garmin units now that I have that have like a 77 kilohertz transducer in it, which is a dual frequency. It'll be like a 200 and a 70 and a 77. So there's things out there that are close, but the 70 is fairly unique to us. And it works really good for our application.
All right. I see you're wearing a Canon shirt today.
Mm-hmm.
Fishhawk.
That's a fluke. So yes, I have a Canon shirt on. Yeah.
All right. So Fishhawk partnered up with Canon a few years ago to create the Optimum. And that's a downrigger that displays Fishhawk data right at the rigger. Do you need to have a Fishhawk display if you've got that?
Yeah, you do. So you need to have the Fishhawk display because that's where we're processing the data, number one, and that's where the Bluetooth radio is, number two. So Bluetooth is a fancy branded word for radio, and that's really what Bluetooth is a radio signal. The radio transmitter is in the display head. So we process the data, and then we transmit that out on the Bluetooth signal, and then that's what communicates with the Optimum.
All right, I was out with Captain Richard Hajecki a couple weeks ago, speaking of great fishermen, and he had the Humminbirds on there, had all the Fishhawk data on the Humminbirds. What needs to happen to be able to make that happen so you can get all those screens throughout the boat with that data on there?
Yeah, that's a pretty cool deal because there's really not a lot that needs to happen if you have the equipment. So if you have the Fishhawk and you have the Optimum and then you have the Humminbird unit, so whether it be the G4 Helix units, the new Solux units. If you've got those three things, it's wireless. It's all done via Bluetooth. So there's no there's no, hard wiring that has to be done to, to accomplish that. So that's really kind of one of the beauties of that. And that's part of, what Cannon and Humminbird call the one boat network. That's all, that's how that lives. So it doesn't require any extra cabling or anything. So that's really kind of the beauty of that setup.
All right, Tiffany Ward's back, and this time she wants to know, if you're fishing alongside another boat who's also running a Fishhawk, is it possible to pick up their probe reading if you're running your probe deeper?
Possible, yes. And the reason I say that is because I've run over lost probes before and actually picked them up. So there was no speed, but I would pick a temperature off them. It's possible, but it's pretty unlikely. It's going to go for the strongest signal, which is obviously going to be the one that's on your boat. And you would have to be uncomfortably close for that to happen. I have seen it happen in marinas, which is kind of interesting. I've seen sonar interference in marinas where if boats are back to back, I have seen it where if the Fishhawk display is on, there's readings coming up on the bottom where it's actually picking up noise that's in the harbor. But in an actual fishing situation on the water, I think you'd have to be so uncomfortably close that it's really not a real concern.
All right. One of the things that I think if people have gone to our website a lot this year, one of the things that they've noticed is that we've been out of product. What's going on with that front as far as getting more Fishhawks on the shelves?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's been good. I mean, we've actually it's one of those good problems to have. I mean, this has been a record sales year for us from, really not even close. So we've actually been producing product the entire time. Everything we're producing, even at this point still, is spoken for, from dealers. Dealers often dealers are ordering product right now for next spring and summer already. But it's a combination of that, with a lot of demand, a lot of participation, and a lot of increase in participation in the last couple of years with the whole pandemic situation, whatever. And then you combine that with component availability. That's our biggest challenge company wide is getting the parts and pieces we need to build it. And what those parts and pieces are, they're simple things. They're resistors and capacitors and things like that. And we compete for those on a global market. And I'm not ashamed to say that we are a very small fish in a big pond. So when you hear news stories that GM isn't getting their microchips, unfortunately, I think Fishhawk usually falls a little bit further down the line in the allocation of who gets what. So it's been a real challenge to get those electronic components. We recognized that pretty early in the season. I mean, the writing was on the wall when we started placing orders, and our the electronics component manufacturers were giving us lead times out into June of 23, where we kind of, the writing was on the wall. So we actually, I'm hoping that we're going to be in good position next year, just based on the fact that everything we need to build product for next season, to our forecast, we ordered in May of this year, and so that's actually starting to come to fruition now. But it's gonna, I think industry wide, even outside of the fishing industry, honestly, the supply chain impacts, my personal opinion is that they're going to be around for at least another 12 months, is by all indications that we see. So.
All right, here's one from Facebook from Jason. He's getting his first Fishhawk in a week. He's getting the next two. What's the biggest mistake newbies make?
I would say just don't overcomplicate it. I mean, the number is the number. There's no such thing as a magic number, and this goes back to the calibration thing probably a little bit. But all we're doing is it's just a little paddle wheel, and we're just counting how many times it goes around. So if you take it for what it is, and you pay attention to say, okay, well, I just got a strike, and my probe said I was going 2-3 down below. Well, they just told you what they wanted, so just repeat that number. I mean, that's the thing. And as you have some success doing that, you'll develop that confidence where at that point, it's easier to trust the unit at that point. But I mean, of all the pieces of electronics on your boat, it's really probably the simplest thing you have on your boat. I mean, it's a lot simpler than a fish finder. It's a lot simpler than your GPS chart plotter. So just take that number for what it is when you start having some success. Duplicate that. Don't get locked into it by any means. And what I mean is you still have to, that's the fishing part of it, is figuring out what the fish want on that given day. So you can't say that, because you caught them doing 2-3 yesterday, that you're going to catch them going 2-3 tomorrow. That sometimes that works, but a lot of times it doesn't. So that's the fishing part of it, where you have to figure that out on any given day. But yeah, it's I would keep it simple, and that's one thing. You mentioned fishing with Rick here a couple of weeks ago. The one thing I've had a lot of opportunities to fish with a lot of really good guys, and that's the one thing all of them share in common. They all do something a little bit differently, but the thing that they all share in common is their attention to detail, and they repeat things. I mean, they don't forget anything. They know what their bearing is. They know what their speed is. They know, all those kind of details. They pay attention to them, and they don't. They're not guessing. They know what, they know what's been working for them. So.
All right, got a couple of questions now coming in with the probes. Larry says he cracked a probe. He got a replacement. Didn't have the breakaway cable. It had 2 snaps with a split ring. Should he be using the cable? And then before you answer that, Captain Matt Benning was on last week. What's the maximum downrigger weight you can use before the safety cable is going to break?
Yeah, so those are timely questions, because they kind of go hand in hand. So we a couple of years ago, I think 2 years ago, we stopped doing the kind of the 12-inch wire leader there. Reason being is that a lot of people are using heavier weights, and the downriggers are also faster now, where guys, people would be upset when their breakaway would break. Kind of, there's a lot of shock, a lot of strain on that system with a heavy weight, and obviously, we get it. Those weights are expensive, and we don't want to put anybody in that situation. So what we did to replace that is a simpler setup, which is the double snap swivel with that heavy duty split ring in the middle, and that pulls apart right around 90 pounds or so. That split ring will fail around 90 pounds. And where the breakaway cable was, roughly the same, but there was more variation with it, and that breakaway cable was subject to wear over time, where that's when sometimes they could potentially fail. But really, what that was is the shock in the cable, where if you're coming off a big wave, or you've got a really fast downrigger with a heavy weight. A lot of guys 15s aren't really considered heavy weights anymore. There's a lot of people fishing 20s, some people fishing 25s, things like that. So that's what we see. That's what we saw. That's what we were experiencing, and that's why we made that change at the time. To answer Matt's question about the maximum weight, if you start getting above, if you're fishing 14s or heavier, I think you're, kind of asking for trouble with that, with the old school, the old style wire leader. So I would say, if you're fishing anything that's maybe above your standard 12-pound weight, that you might want to consider going to the double snap setup or a snubber setup. We offer one that Warrior Lures makes for us. So there's that. Dreamweaver makes a good one. Scotty makes a good one. Those snubber setups are nice because they introduce a kind of a level of shock absorption there to the system. And when people, that's the other thing too, is most people are not fishing their probes near the bottom for obvious reasons. So it's really not a matter of hanging your probe up on the bottom. The vast majority of the time, it's a matter of protecting the cable. So most probes that are lost because the cable snaps, not because you hang up on the bottom. And it's that shock absorption piece that those snubber products provide. That's I think where those pay dividends.
All right, we're gonna put an end to the guest or the public questions. I got 2 more questions for you, and then I'll let you kind of close us out here. But Fishhawk makes a great product. Well, one of the things that I see, at least working with you guys, that kind of sets you apart is the customer service. And I know that's something that you and the people in the office with Steve working this spring, and Karen, you guys have really put a lot of work into making that even better. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've got coming up on that front and what's been happening now?
Yeah, I mean, we just been using, as we put more and more product in the field every year, it just gets more difficult to stay on top of that, as far as just the number of contacts. So, all of a sudden you put, 10,000 more pieces in the field every year, whether it's probes or whatever. And, that starts to add up where, over time it becomes a bigger and bigger challenge. So our answer to that has been, technology. Where we put the live chat in. That features run great. I think a lot of people are more comfortable with the chat features now. You see them, in a lot of places. And the thing that we do with the chat is it's not routed to a to a call center or anything. It's actually coming to us. So it's Steve or it's myself that's answering those chats, and we're able to. I mean, we get a lot of them on the water. I mean, which has been really great. So people are on the water, they have an issue, questions, whatever. That's really the simplest way to connect on that is to just go up a chat, and it's certainly. It's probably an age thing, where, our, customers maybe under the age of 50 or seem to be more comfortable with it and engage with the chat really well. But it's simple enough that really anybody can use it. And that's been a big help. And then just the things that we're trying to do, that we do, so you pulled up the service forum there, just in those contact forms where if we can get all your information at one time, where we don't have to make multiple contacts to do that, that really speeds up the process for everybody, where, we can, even as busy as we are, during this time of year with peak season, we still turn product around within 24 hours. So most of the time, if we get your product in the morning, we have it turned back around in the afternoon if we have all your contact information. So what kind of slows that process down is if we have to hunt for that or things like that, because it's kind of amazing. But I don't consider it an inexpensive product, but we get stuff a lot of times in packages that we have no idea who it's from. There's no notes, there's nothing like that in there. So that really slows the process down as far as us being able to get your stuff back to you quickly. But the things we're doing technology wise with the chat, with the email forms and things like that, it just makes it for a smoother process, and it lets us, it really has been a big help in keeping up and maintaining the turnaround speed and everything, even when we are super busy like we are right now.
All right, Captain Jamie Shane from 42 Charters asked earlier, like right when we went on the air, this question, and I wanted to save it to the end. Hopefully he's still watching, but this is probably my most common question I get on social media right now, and that's what's coming out new from Fishhawk? What's on the horizon? Everybody wants to know.
So we've actually been working on stuff for a long time. I mean, product development done right takes a long time, and then on top of that, it takes a year longer than you think it will. And especially right now, I'd mentioned the whole component situation earlier. That's made product development a lot tougher. But yes, we've got quite a bit of new product coming that we anticipate for cross my fingers. Hopefully this supply issues start to remedy themselves here in the next year. But so we're hoping for 23 that we'll have quite a bit of new product. The one thing that we always try to do with new product that I think is a little different from some electronics companies is we're really big on backwards compatibility. So when we build something, we want it to work with product that's already out there in the field, and that continues with the things that we're working on right now. So much in the same way that we took what was out there, a good product in the 840, the old 840 units, the black probes, and made it better with the X4s. That's always our goal, is to keep advancing it, and there's new technologies out there that we think are going to work great in the products, and that's what we're working on right now, and hopefully this supply chain thing gets ironed out here in the next 12 months or so, where we're able to do that. So.
All right, Trevor, now it's your turn. Anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to bring up tonight and you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I think we kind of hit it. I think this is maybe this will be into the not Fishhawk related stuff, but we've had some situations in the office with some of our personnel this year where they're going through some really tough things in their life on a personal level, as far as kind of expecting the unexpected with not necessarily related to pandemics, but illnesses and sick children and things like that. So I guess I guess one of the things I've kind of taken away from those challenges that those people have been going through is that don't wait to do this stuff. So if you've got a fishing trip that you want to do, or you've got some activities that you want to do, outdoor stuff specifically, because that's the world we live in, and that's what we, that's where we find our joy and recreation. Don't wait to do that stuff. And I think about like the trip you took a couple weeks ago with your dad and your son, and you went out and did a Lake Erie, Lake Ontario tour. If you've got the opportunity to do that stuff, you need to do it. Don't wait for retirement. Don't wait till this is over, that's over. Do it. And like I say, that's coming from some personal experiences we've had this summer where, we've had some staff that have been in real bad situations with illness and things like that. And yeah, that stuff needs to happen. That needs to be a priority in your life. So. Yeah,
we are planning an Isle Royal trip for next spring. So
yeah, I'm down with that. Now that you're a proud boat owner, that'll be the maiden voyage once we get the shakedown done. So
yeah, we got to do it. So we're writing that down. Thanks to everybody for bringing the questions tonight. We're gonna make Ken Rodenhouse from YouTube our winner, and Ken, if you can message us through Facebook. Just send us a private message with your address. We'll get out a package to you. For Trevor Sumption, I'm Chris Larson. Thanks again so much for joining us tonight and bringing some great questions. I hope we answered a bunch of questions for you tonight. But again, if you've got more questions, you can go to the Fishhawk Electronics website. We've got that chat feature there. You can go in there, and during the day, the guys are on there all the time answering questions. If you ask after hours, it'll be the next day before you get your answer. But during the day, there's always people on answering questions. So thanks so much to Trevor, and thanks for everybody for watching. We will see you next week.